Welcome back. Today we're going to look at variables. Variables are an integral part of all computer languages. In order to think about what they are and how they work, I'd like you to think about computer memory itself. One of the best ways that I've found of explaining computer memory to people is asking them to imagine it as a gigantic spreadsheet where each cell can hold an individual piece of data. So what kind of data would we want to store? Well, that entirely depends on the kind of application we're writing. But let's say that we're writing an application where we're asking the person for their name and their year of birth, and then we're going to calculate their age from that. So each of those pieces of information we would put into a cell. So we have Dana Willis as the name of the user, the year Dana was born is 1985, and then Dana's age, which we're going to calculate. So spreadsheets have their own way of identifying those cells. The columns are all lettered, the rows are all numbered, so Dana Willis would be identified as cell B3. Now that works pretty well for spreadsheets, but even those, when they get very large, that becomes problematic because it's very hard for you to remember that cell AA472 is some particular piece of information. And then there's the whole problem of inserting rows or columns, and then things get mixed up. So years ago, some very bright people came up with the idea of a variable. And they said, okay, let's take these values and associate names with them rather than some cryptic memory address. So here we're showing the values that we had from our spreadsheet. And then now we can turn those into variables. And we do that by assigning different names to the different pieces of information. And notice that the names that we choose are meaningful. They make sense. We don't use variable names like X and Y and because 6 months from now, when you come back and look at your code to make some changes to it, or someone is working with you and is trying to work with your code, X and Y won't mean anything. So we use things like name, year of birth, age. Now there is a principle associated with this that says let's use the most obvious names that we can. And that principle is called the principle of least astonishment. Now, I don't know if the people who came up with this were just having a laugh at us or not, but that name, the principle of least astonishment, is one of the least obvious ways that you could name a principle that says be obvious. But that's what it's called. So let's go back now and take a look at the representation of computer memory. And gone are the B3 and the D4. And now we instead associate those meaningful names like name and year of birth. Now, that's how we get data into the computer as a variable, but how do we get it out? Because typically you're going to want to get it out. The reason that you store it is for later use. So this is known as dereferencing. And in dereferencing, you give the computer the name of the variable, and the computer turns around and gives you the value of the variable. So again, I asked it for the name, and it returned Dana. So where do values come from? Well, primarily from two places. From user input, things like users entering information into form fields or clicking on a poll or any sort of user input we can typically trap and get information from. The other primary source is a calculation. So in the situation, the example I'm giving, we're asking Dana for the year she was born. She's going to tell us 1985. We're going to do a calculation, and we'll create a new variable called age and say that it will be the current date minus the year of birth. The year of birth we got from the form that she filled in. And then we might create another one from that that says, are they legal? So we say is legal age equal age is greater than 17. This is going to return either true or false. Either the age is greater than 17 or it isn't. So in both of those cases, we have calculated the value of the variable. So I've written a little bit of code that will ask us for the information about the person's name and the year that they were born in, and just put it into a web page. And we're going, well, let's just do it first. So we'll put in Dana, and then you notice that we've immediately output that information. So we got the information, Dana, stored it in computer memory, and then immediately output it by dereferencing. And then if I ask Dana what year she was born in, and she tells us 1985, now we do that calculation. We store the year she was born, we subtract it from the current year, and we get 34 years old. So our takeaways for this little video are that variables are name-value pairs. That variable names should be both meaningful and obvious. That we can both write and read those variables. And finally, that the primary way that values are created is either through user input or through calculations that we write to the right code for. So hopefully this has given you a little better insight into how variables work in computer languages.